You guys, I am thrilled for this episode today. I am chatting with Dr. Will Dobud. He is a respected social work researcher and a senior lecturer at Charles Sturt University, known for pioneering outdoor therapy programs for youth and advocating for adolescents impacted by America's troubled teen industry. We dive into his brand new book, Kids These Days, co-authored with Dr. Nevin Harper, and explore how to reframe mental health and cultivate resilience in our teens. Let's get to it. Much for being here. I am really, really excited. We were just talking about this before I hit record. You've written a tremendous book with also Dr. Nevin Harper, who I want to acknowledge. And I am excited to talk to you. First of all, the name of the book is called Kids These Days, which I love the title. And I was just saying that to you in part because I think it's a phrase that we often use. And for me, at least, it feels like we associate it with sort of a resigned attitude of like, what are you going to do? Like a shrug of the shoulders and this kind of acceptance, but at the same time going like, gosh, we probably could be doing something or tending to our kids in some way that would help them, navigate the world in a better way for themselves. So welcome. And I'd love if you just kind of, before we even dive into the book, I love even your work with nature, and you do so many things to help teens and a lot of research that's so pertinent to this area of development. So could you just kind of start off by giving us a little introduction and letting us know sort of the passion behind your projects and what it is that really prompted you to want to write this book?
Sure. So my background is I grew up with quite a wild childhood. I had any kind of adolescent mental health researcher, I had quite a turbulent adolescence of my own. At the same time, I grew up with this amazing experience where accidentally I got to go to summer camp all the time. And I loved being outside. It was my safe place. I thought this is way more fun than school, which probably most kids would probably
Yeah.
agree with for the most part. And one of the amazing things is after going to therapy as a teenager, I always thought I this is there's not much to this, and I kind of just thought as a kid it's not that meaningful, but I kind of actually really loved being around adults that were caring people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came time to figure out, am I going to go to college? Am I going to go to university? I didn't know what to study. I was a good musician. I tried music theory. I was a volunteer firefighter. I tried fire science. And I went, you know what? Let's just go do psychology and dive into this. At the same time, I got jobs working with young people in the outdoors. That inevitably changed to social work. I never looked back. I just went
Mm.
from the age of 21. I went working with young people in the outdoors is just going to be my thing forever. And I I love it because you get the opportunity to see young people at their best. And I don't actually think now looking back that has anything to do with nature or being outside. It has
Mm-hmm.
everything to do with who who are you actually looking for when you're meeting a client. And if you want to go meet an anxious person, just go look for anxious people. And if you
Yeah.
want to meet competent, curious people, you'll look for that person. And so becoming a researcher, which as someone who barely finished high school is, I mean, my eighth grade history teacher, who was a big impact on my life, he said, I really wish I put like $1 down in Vegas that you'd ever get a PhD because I'd be a billionaire, you know? And so I was a terror to a lot of adults. Um, but the most interesting thing to me was when I got to reading peer reviewed research or reading how researchers talk about teenagers, how they talk about children, I went, we are really missing the point here. And that was
Yeah.
kind of the getting towards the book. We had written academic books that nobody reads before, and we just thought, it's actually come time to actually, inject ourselves with some truth serum here and really get to the point of how is it that we have more therapists, educators than ever before, more medications, more diagnoses, and everything's getting worse. How is this possible? So
Yeah, I love it.
that was our motivation.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect that was my takeaway from it, is when I started to read it and I read a little bit about your, upbringing and some of the things that had happened to you in different classroom settings. And like you said, you gave a lot of adults a run for their money. I think it's really, a good friend of mine, his name is Joe Newman. He's written a book called Raising Lions, and he talks a lot about this idea of really working with strong-willed kids and kids then who become teens and whatnot. And he's a lot of the themes that you guys talk about in your book are really similar to what he's experienced. And he too, he's probably, I don't want to say he's the wrong age, but he's I would say in his 50s, and he was diagnosed with ADHD at a very young age where probably no one even knew what it really was. And he did also kind of describe being just very misguided, and he sort of had to find his way on his own. And it was through experiences, establishing his own sense of resilience, mastery, which is one of the things you guys talk about in the book, which I want to get to. He really found his way, and he found out like what he really needed. And then he's basically created his own approach, and he now goes into schools and teaches on it. And he's really fantastic. But it really boils down to this idea, which is where I kind of wanted to start, was like the framework you guys outline in the book. You have three really specific frameworks, which I love. And it's, just I'd love to start with interference, which is sort of the first one. So talk to me a little bit about, one, you kind of said it already, but you're looking at sort of the way we approach teens and, what we call a quote unquote crisis, a mental crisis. It feels like every other person has either a disorder, something's been pathologized, there is something going on. I kind of say this myself in other podcast episodes or when I'm working with families, but we've become a generation of parent like fixers. Like we just want to fix everything. And we often look at the problem lying outside of us, right? Like, oh, can you fix my child? Something is wrong when they do A, B, or C. And so, a lot of my work really goes into whether I'm writing, whether I'm coaching, whether I'm hosting a podcast and it's a solo episode. My mission is to get people to understand that this is a very interconnected dynamic. So whatever you're seeing your child do, there's a direct correlation. And it's not to say that you're doing anything wrong. It's just an invitation to really look at the way you're showing up within this dynamic and figure out what your child really needs versus what you think they may need based on programming, based on societal pressures and things like that. So can we start with the framework that you guys outline in the book and kind of begin with interference?
Yeah. So interference was one of the things is we cast too wide of a net in writing this book. Like, as you know, there's a chapter in the interference section about environmental toxins. This was not something intended. It's not something I'm an expert on. It is not something I lose sleep about in my day-to-day life. But talking to an environmental health researcher from a children's perspective, I went, why does nobody talk about this really thorny question? Why is this sort of off the table? And what it kind of, I guess, really inspired with us in the writing is, where do you put a chapter about environmental toxins in a book about mental health? Because that could be one book on its own, right? And as we were thinking about it, we thought, well, what are the themes of all these chapters? And we knew we were already arguing about too much intervention, too much labeling, too much of living on planet mental health, too many parenting books, too many of all these things. And so we knew that was part of it, because at the end of the day, you could memorize all the parenting books. At the end of the day, parenting, amateur sport. Once you think you've mastered it, the rules change.
Yeah.
And once you've mastered a 10-year-old, they become a 13-year-old, then they're a 6. We've all been there, right? And so one of the interesting things is Nevin in our discussion said, what about interference, intervention, and ideology? And those were the three kind of the frameworks, as you say, the 3 parts of the book. And interference was sort of about what has changed about childhood. And it's very common that when we talk about childhood has changed, we do fall into this kids these days trap. Back in my day, I hear experts today say, kids should stay outside till the street lights come on. Now, what's hilarious, my dad said that to me.
Yeah.
We've been hearing this forever. And so we went back and we found, caricatures of Socrates in 600 BC ripping on kids for being lazy, not well read, out of shape,
Mm-hmm.
disrespectful to elder. And I went, this is actually hilarious
Yeah.
that this happens. But then you get to the scary stuff. You get to loneliness. Um, you get to um, how we see these rising rates of social disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And the interventions almost always lead children to feel like they are not loved. There's something wrong with you for
Mm-hmm.
acting out while being disconnected and lonely. And that was a really sad sort of chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go into the phones, and I think the phones are the biggest scapegoat today. And one one thing to me is I think it's really great to blame the phones because adults, it doesn't mean we have to do anything as adults. Removing the phones doesn't mean kids will be less lonely.
Mm-hmm.
They still
Right.
need adults. Are we going to put down our phones and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden start teaching play and being outside together and doing? And I just thought there's this interfering with childhood. Um, and then we get to the toxins and the segue from the interference of toxins to talking about intervention is that experts in the world of toxins are warning our regulatory bodies all the time we have to get rid of certain chemicals and we can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is wild to me. And
Yeah.
so I see it from my own social work professions as an American, as a pseudo Australian, as
Mm-hmm.
someone who thinks quite globally about these things. I'm fascinated how we can have what we all consider the best available research, but it still actually is really hard to get us all to act.
Yeah.
And so when I see rising rates of youth mental illness, claims that there's a crisis going on, it does really rattle me that if it is just loneliness, there's a really quick fix to this. And it's being together and doing things with kids. And if it's just the phones, I think we're really missing the point on what's interfering with childhood. And that's not me saying the phones don't stink and social media is a trap and it's awful and giving every kid access to pornography is a good idea. I'm not saying that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I don't fully believe we've really mapped out what's interfering, or even interfering is a good word, but what is stealing childhood today? And
Yeah.
that's where we thought we had to approach this with a lot of breadth.
Yeah, I love that. And I loved the way you like the way you outlined it in the book around this idea of the phone being the scapegoat. And I hear it all the time, right? Just even from friends or people in my community. My kids are older. I have a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old. And it's interesting when I look at, phones and social media, a lot of people will ask, sort of my take on it. And the truth is we didn't let them have phones until they were, I think, 13 and 14 was when they got them. And it wasn't out of any real like virtuous, like, you will not have a phone. Like, we didn't really feel that way about it. We never demonized the phone, quite frankly. Like, we just thought they're busy. They were both really active kids. Like, to your point, my kids, if they could have been outside all the time, would have chosen to be outside all the time, and which all wasn't always fun. We live in Michigan. We're right outside of Detroit, so winters can be terribly cold and summers can be, brutally humid and hot. But nonetheless, they were never phased. They really loved it, and so we were kind of followed their lead in that way. And so when they got their phones, what I thought was pretty interesting, and I want to get to this because I think the idea of connectivity is really at the underbelly of like what it is that you're describing in this instance, is that they had their phones and they weren't swept away. They weren't, like immediately immersed and just lost in their phones all the time and could never tear away from their phones. And that we never had that impression. And as they began to get, go through their own experiences, we sort of took a backseat approach and we tried to see how will they navigate this when it becomes a situation where they won't like it, or maybe, or will they? Like, who knows how it will go? And I will tell you, both of my kids on their own have deleted apps, have stopped going on. My son played college soccer, and every time he was in his season of playing, he completely took every social media app off. And not out of any like it's bad, but more of a understanding of how he wanted to spend his time and where he welcomed distractions and where he didn't. And we didn't have to ever say anything. I never said to him, like, you should really get off that app and you should, it really like organically happened. And I think in part, and I'll get your intake or your input on this, but I think a lot of it was because it never took the primary focus in their lives. They had other things that they cared about and valued and felt connected to us and other people. And so, what would you say to a parent who's just trying to navigate that, but is just bombarded right now with like one fear inducing piece of advice after the other around the phone, around social media, around how it almost feels like people are just tiptoeing around it, terrified that it's going to be the thing that swoops in and takes their child away?
This is such a great question, and the last year in the United States has been only it's been solely focused on the phones and social media, and inherently, I often ask when I'm doing a talk about this, people to zoom back about 4.5 years ago when all school was online. What was the messaging we told kids? You need
Mm-hmm.
digital literacy. You have to go online. All your work's going to be online. Most
Mm-hmm.
of you are going to work from home. And the issue is, with COVID, that all made sense. And for children, this is inherently confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Two
Right.
years later, get off the phone. It's terrible. It's going to ruin it's going to corrupt your brain. You're not going to know how to play anymore. And I do think, in essence, it is very confusing. And to each family, their own.
Yeah.
You have your own values, make up your own mind about what you think is the right thing to do. It's one thing about this book that I think to-do lists and checklists end up giving many parents and I mean this happens to therapists like myself as well. We think this gives us a false sense of security that
Mm-hmm.
if I just follow this checklist, this will work out. And when
Yeah.
it inevitably doesn't, then we feel more demoralized than ever before. And so when it comes to the phones, I think we need to actually really educate children about using the phones, actually teach digital literacy. And we
Mm-hmm.
talk about this in the book that there's a difference from digital interference and digital integration. And
Yes.
digital integration is actually being able to use these things, use this incredible technology in a very mindful way. And just today, we went on a walk this morning. I'm in Sydney, Australia at the moment. And we walked down near the harbor bridge, beautiful, near the opera house. And these two young people, they would have been 12 or 13, two young boys come walking up the steps. It's probably 6:30 in the morning with fishing rods in their school uniforms. And if anyone has watched Harry Potter, most private schools in Australia, all the kids dress like they're going to Harry Potter. I say that as an American, not to mean offense. Suit, tie, hat, slacks, nice shoes. And I said, "Do y'all catch anything?" And they said, "We had two salmon, but they got off the hook. And now they're walking to school on a Monday morning." And I went,
Mm.
you know what? Maybe the kids are doing some things that surprise us more and more if we really look at it and we catch it. Where if we only see the kids on the phone,
Yeah.
we're going to miss out on the other stuff. So when I'm working with parents, I often say, who do you want to notice? Do you want to notice the teenager? Because then you'll fall for the kids these days trap.
Mm-hmm.
These kids are lazier than I was. Well, that's what your parents said about you too, and their
Yep.
parents said about them. And you're going to fall for this kind of this thing that has gone on for millennia. But the other thing is, if if there's kids going outside and doing these things, why don't we talk about that too? And if we give
Yeah.
those things legs, it might take up a bit more of our attention to realize, you know what? 80% of the kids are probably all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And I completely agree. And I think that, we see what we want to see. And it's not to say that there aren't challenges. And like you said, this idea of digital integration feels so much more balanced than, completely banning and taking away and removing and just, a lot of times that just elicits more curiosity in kids and like, well, now I definitely want to do it, instead of just looking at it through the lens of like, well, this is the direction things are going. How can we balance this out? How can we create more integration, more connection, right? To the point that you guys bring in the book. And just this idea that there are actually a lot of teens doing really cool things right now. And quite frankly, there are some teens doing really cool things on social media, on some of these platforms. So we can't completely demonize. And I always say like an all or nothing approach is the first point where you want to stop yourself. Like even in parenting or
Yes,
when I'm coaching parents, it's like the minute we adopt an all or nothing approach, you've missed the mark somewhere. You know, there's some fear
100%.
that is sort of guiding that process for you, and instead just really look at what it could be. So I want to tie in the idea of, because I get asked this question all the time from families that I work with. I do both coaching individually and I also do some group programming and courses. And one of the questions I get fairly often is it's kind of a twofold, but I think it's almost the same question, which is one, how do we raise then emotionally resilient kids slash teens? And how do we ensure that we don't raise entitled kids?
Mm,
And I was thinking on that as I was reading your book, and I was thinking on, because my answer, I'll tell you my answer after you answer, but
mhm.
I'm thinking it's going to be very aligned with what I say, because I think a lot of parents fall under the trap of like entitlement comes from too many material things, which I'm not saying that's not the case, but there's more to it. Like we got to dig a little deeper, we got to go a little further. So I'd love sort of your thoughts on this, because I think a big part of your book really looks at, actually there is this way through mastery, through connection, and you highlight four really important points of how we can get kids to become more emotionally resilient. So let's start there, and where do we even begin to bring this forth?
So quite often, and this is such a great loaded question, and I'm so glad you've asked it. One of the things is coming from the outdoor field. When, for instance, when I was doing my doctoral research, I was talking with young people, and I'm talking with them, and they're saying, making a fire in the rain. I'd never put so much effort into this thing. And I was going, wow. And why were you referred to this type of therapy? And they said, I was inattentive. I had no patience. I could not sit still. And I'm going, I've spent thousands of days of my life camping. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't sound like an inattentive, impatient person. I went, this doesn't add up.
Yeah.
This sounds like a dissonance. And so it sent me on this mastery rabbit, going down the rabbit hole. And success and mastery was used in a adolescent psychiatry conference in the 1930s together. And it said, if we're going to help kids, we need to make them feel successful. We need to give them something they're successful at and that they're masterful at. And what that does, the idea of this, is it reorients the child, aka the learner,
Mm-hmm.
towards doing more things. Now, none of this, I mean, that was the 30s, so we're thinking of experienced educators like John Dewey, terms like scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
Actually give kids things to do that they will master and then make it harder. Don't
Yeah.
give them things that are too hard. It'll feel impossible or totally demoralizing. It's too much. So you want to actually set kids up for success, but they still need to put the effort in so that they can own their own success. So in the therapy world, we often hear quips like this, like I was teaching this morning. The best therapist should get no thank you notes because the client did it themselves.
Mm.
And so when I'm working with young people, I'm not interested in taking their story from them. I don't need a thank you. I don't need anything. I don't need gifts. You can always come back and hang out with me if you want to. That's cool. But if what we're doing is not leading you to feel like you have control over your own experience, not interested.
Mm.
And so I'll try to change it. So the interesting thing is a lot of people think about the outdoors and they go, well, being outside in nature, there's some good research about that. You know, playing music, there's good music therapy research, all these things. I think it's much more kind of simple and human than all of this. I think if you like being outside on a surfboard and you stand up one time and then you fall down 10 more times after that, you're still interested in chasing that one time you stood up on a surfboard.
Mm-hmm.
So we can really embrace being with young people as in their view of what's important and be a part of it. So you stood up once but fell down 10 more times. How were you able to keep paddling out past the back of the wave to get ready to fail again? And
Yeah.
as parents, we inherently do this with our infants, right? There is nothing, for the most part, harder that any infant has done than learning to walk. They fail more at that than learning almost anything else in their life. And they fall, and it hurts, and who do they look to? They look to where belonging is. You don't need arrows on the ground to
Yeah.
say, that's where mom is. The child
Yeah.
falls, looks at you, and we all know this when the child falls, before they even register pain, they're looking to the adult to go, am I okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is it
Mm-hmm.
okay that I really messed this up? And we go, you're good. Do it
Yeah.
again.
Mm-hmm.
Fail again. It's
Yeah.
awesome. And so anyone who's been a musician, um, learning a new activity, you have to fail to learn how to bar a chord on a guitar better, to play the scale on the piano better. And so I think quite often when it comes to resilience, if we think about what young people really want to master and what gives them that sense of, I'm really curious about getting better at this,
Mm-hmm.
they'll embrace failing at many things. And that's okay, because failing is also a success if you're practicing.
Yes.
So if
Yes.
if you're practicing and getting it right all the time, newsflash, you're not practicing anything,
Yeah.
you know? So I think when it comes to resilience, we can provide, like we talk about this, like safe enough places
Yeah.
where the safety of the lighthouse. They know where they can come back to for safety. They can also know, I can take a risk and mess this up, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. I know in the book, you guys, I love that you, and I think a lot of the themes in the book honestly could go just in life. Like, I think even so many adults could look at the same thing and go, gosh, well, what's my relationship with risk like? Because you say in there that, risk isn't a negative word, and that's true. But I
Mm,
think we look at risk and we're like, oh my gosh, like let's risk and reward, right? We go right into sort of this binary way of approaching it. And I don't know who said it, and I'm sure I'm probably quoting somebody, but I do always go back to this idea that, confidence is gained through competence. We're not just inherently confident because somebody says to you like you're so smart or you did great on that. It's more along the lines of what you're saying, the scaffolding approach of like dealing with a little bit of frustration, dealing with some adversity, having a little bit of challenge, and then going, I got to try again. I can do it better. Let me do it one more time. Let me see if I can, and through that process, and as we get toward mastery, well, then, you're standing a little taller, your shoulders are up, right? And you're going, okay, I think the next time something comes my way that feels maybe impossible or feels like I can't do it, I've done it before. And I talk about this a lot with families. We want to think about this idea of allowing our kids to be experiential learners. Like there's
mhm.
benefit in what I call like stacking your experiences. And what I see more often than not is like we're just not letting the experiences happen. And we're a culture of, there's a lot of talking and teaching. And teaching isn't always an overt practice, meaning we don't all kids are inherently learning. Like you just described the infant who falls, and without arrows on the ground, the infant knows to look or at their person, right? Their caretaker, the person they were bonded to. And that doesn't require explicit teaching, that's a known thing. And kids are always learning. Kids are inherently curious. Kids are naturally making sense of their world. And they do this through making meaning from their experiences, not necessarily the words we say. So I love the idea that you bridged that and the way you looked at that, because it's true. It's like if we could just get a little more comfortable, and this is where I wanted to go next, because you talk about this in the book too, is like you kind of look at not just parents, but even like teachers, therapists, a lot of people who really shape the minds and lives of our youth, taking a little bit of a backseat approach. So talk to me a little bit about where, like, if you're a parent who's really white knuckling it through like the teen
Hmm.
years and you're like, I must, rigidly work through this to get to the other side, where would we start, or how do we look at that from a research based perspective in terms of what that child actually needs versus what you're sort of calming within when you take a more rigid approach?
So let me put my nerd and researcher goggles on for a second. When you look at variance and outcomes, which is like what contributes the most to therapy outcomes. So if we take our teenager and we go, I don't know what to do, and I need some additional support. And I mean, those are the people who call me every day on the phone, right? One of the most amazing things is 86% of the variance in psychotherapy outcomes are client factors.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to do with the person who walks through my door. They have nothing, 14% are things that I can maybe deal with. It is mostly the young person. And so for many many parents, I really try to get them to think about what are they noticing. And just like, I mean, many of us have been in a bad partnership before, where you're sitting next to someone watching TV, and we're not even thinking about the person next to us. We're thinking, "Ugh, I just hope they don't do that thing that really annoys me," instead of going, "Hey, this is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is it's
Yeah.
really nice to like it's really nice to sit and talk with you. It's really nice
Yeah.
to sit next to my wife Renee, and I go, this is a really nice moment." And so try to find ways to treat things that are commonly incidental as not so incidental. And so young people, what do they say when they come to therapy? They go, "I'm trying my best and no one notices."
Mm,
Yeah, just think about what we notice about them. And
yeah.
so when we notice more of when they're trying their best, it kind of, if we notice it and point it out by going up and going, "I actually really noticed you doing that." We used to do this, we used to call them therapeutic experiments so that they're allowed to fail. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're allowed to be a failed experiment. That's how experiments work. And I'd say to young people when they'd leave my office, I'd say, you know, when you go home tonight, I want you to do something that just radically shocks your parents. And let's just see if they notice.
Mm-hmm.
And the parents would call me and say, "Will, why is my 7-year-old trying to start the lawnmower?" And I go, "He wants to help you, you
Mm-hmm.
know?" And so if we start thinking about what we notice instead of what's wrong,
Yeah.
it actually changes our perception of things because it's actually easier to make more of what works go better. So a
Yeah.
good enough musician, it's easier to become a better musician than going, "This horrible musician, why aren't you a better musician?" So these simple kind of colloquials, it's actually, the funny thing is, the big picture evidence backs it up that if you want a therapeutic intervention to work, 86% of it has something to do with the person sitting right across from you. And
Yeah.
so your child is doing this. I mean, adolescence is like puberty, preteen years. It's awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's. I mean, it's wild. Like,
Yes.
but if we really remember what this was like, I think we'd have a lot more of a caring approach to. Yeah, this is this is brutal for kids.
Yeah.
And another thing, thinking about, like we talked briefly about neuroscience, because I did not want to go down the rabbit hole, because there's a great article called "The Seductive Allure of Neuroscience," which is we all fall for these ideas and they don't change anything.
Mm-mm.
And one of the things is the adolescent brain goes through this pruning process where kids lose the ability to remember, the ability to speak coherently and clearly, which is why your teenager comes home from school, you say, "How was your day?" And they go, "Huh?"
Mm-hmm.
And all of us would accept that if we knew that by around 25, they'd have the most advanced brain of any organism that has ever, they could build a bridge, they could go to the moon. Like, we'd all be much kinder with this, our approach. So I think what we notice changes everything.
Yeah. I love that idea of, I call it noticing. I've written about it too. And it's like, even in your own life, if you can even just stop and notice what works or what felt good, or just, it's, to me, it's such a simple concept, but it really does really change your outlook and perspective. And if you're somebody who maybe leans in that sort of direction of like getting very caught in the weeds and just seeing things as not working and not working out and forecasting, worst case scenarios, if you can just stop and get in the habit of noticing, I think what it really does too is it brings a sense of presence. And like fear isn't in the driver's seat anymore, because I think when we are noticing what isn't working, it's always sort of, it's derives in this place of like, I'm so afraid that it's not going to work out. I'm so afraid my kid isn't going to amount to the person I know he can be or she can be. I'm so afraid that my value as a parent is dwindling every time I see my child engage in X behavior. So when we can stop, because that's all forward thinking, right? And we can just go, how cool was that he went and helped his younger brother
Right.
reach something that he couldn't reach, or how amazing was that like he cracked that really funny joke, and even though maybe it was slightly inappropriate, everyone laughed and it was like a solid
Mm.
moment. It was a great
Yeah.
moment of fun and connection. Like if we could just stop and notice some of those moments and not let that fear piece get in the way, because like you said, their brains are still developing. It's a really wild time in development
Yeah.
if we really unpack it. And what I've noticed also with not just within my own parenting journey, but as I watch other parents and support them in their process, what starts to happen, and there's probably research somewhere to support this,
Mm.
but what I find is that a parent's expectation immediately increases when their child is a teen, because the thought process, much like the title of your book of like kids these days, these sort of things we buy into of like, like in this instance, I'm thinking most parents will say, you're old enough to know better, right? So the minute we adopt that thinking, our patience increases. And I'm sorry, our expectations increase
Mm.
and our patience decreases. So we're left with the situation where we want them up here. We want this sort of expectation of, because you're older, you should know better and not do the, A, B, or C. And because I believe that about you, that you should know better, I'm going to have a very small ability to tolerate when you engage in those things. And that disconnect for me, or that the difference in those two, from those 2 points, feels significant enough that that's where a lot of that disconnect happens. Those reactive moments, those fights, the back and forth of who's right and who's wrong, and engaging in some of those battles that really, quite frankly, aren't probably that important in the grand scheme of things. So I love everything that you're saying, and I have so much I want to still ask you. So
Mm-hmm.
you talk a lot about the idea of evidence-based resilience, and there's four guys highlight in the book. I think it was from, I don't remember it, the little green book. I know you guys mentioned that
Mm-hmm.
in the book, and how this really is rooted also in a lot of the work that you guys do with your outdoor therapy and nature. But it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have connection, mastery, gratitude, and independence. Can we talk a little bit about gratitude? I think like connection and mastery are, I mean, they're also important, but I'd love to weave in gratitude, because I think most parents of teens usually will say they're never grateful. They're just never grateful for anything. Or, we sort of write them off as these entitled kids in
Mm-hmm.
this time of their life where it's, them and only them that is the concern.
I think it's a balance of gratitude and also generosity. That if you,
Mm,
going back to noticing, if you watch young people, they often, like you said, reaching up and helping their younger sibling or doing things, thinking about catching generosity when it's there. But we have to give young children opportunities to exhibit generosity and the gratitude to say thank you. And so one of the things I, as I've thought about experiential learning and as an educator myself at the same time, one of the things is we, for far too long, think of children as this empty vessel required to
mm,
be filled by some expert. So we've outsourced growing up to all of these experts. And so, but one of the interesting things is they still grow up irregardless of all these experts. They still do the work. And if we actually gave them experience instead of all this expert interference and intervention, if we actually gave them environments where they could kind of feel like they're at their best, one of the amazing things is I think young people will exhibit gratitude, that it's not something we really have to overly teach people. Also, I think that in a world where many educators and therapy folks and experts are experiencing this burnout, the world's changing so fast, it's impossible to keep up. We're coming out, I mean, we're, we're 2 years removed from a pandemic that was like changed all of our lives. Like
mm-hmm,
it was, it
mm-hmm,
was, it was ridiculous. Like it was
mm-hmm.
wild,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and and we keep trying to keep up, and but so are kids. They are
Mm-hmm.
also trying to keep up. It's amazing how fast they're able to keep up, and we're sitting here going, this is really fast. I do think if we think about the world they're living in, and really, do we give children something to imitate? If we give them something to imitate, they'll be grateful for it. So when they're really in the, you know, down in the dumps and life stinks, and we just don't need to talk, go bring them a hot chocolate. I'm here for you.
Yeah, I love
I
that. I
th-
always say it's the most overlooked piece of parenting is empathy. We get so quick to correct it and fix it and solve it that we're like, oh, if you're not feeling good, okay, I can, and I wanted to highlight this because you talk about pain in the book and the sort of reluctance to, nobody wants it, but right, it's sort
no,
of this
of course.
necessary tool. But empathy, right, just going, and even if you don't get why they're upset, even if you just said that must have been so hard today.
And can I love everything I've read about like a reframe and parenting with not less effort, but like less, having to be at center stage in
Yes. Hmm.
someone's life, right? I love everything that you've done. And one of the most interesting things about empathy, and this is the most paradoxical thing I teach therapists all the time. You can never know if you were really empathetic. I can't get home from work and say, Renee, you should have seen me with my clients today. I was so empathetic, right?
Yeah.
It's only in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
So we have to do our best to go, was my parenting approach today, you know, was that received? And
Yeah.
so with the best intentions, we can also get into this trap of going, all I wanted to do was talk about things or not talk about things. And the young person, we have to ask, was that the right approach? And I don't mean that like, you have to be a leader of your house. I
Yeah,
don't mean,
absolutely.
like,
Hmm.
you know, let a teenager run the roost. I don't
Sure.
mean that. But at the same time, we can leave a situation going, I was so hooly dooly empathetic.
Hmm.
And your child is going, not even close.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Right. Well, especially if we think of it like more from a performative place too, of like,
Yeah.
oh, check that box. Like to your point earlier of like when we look at parenting through some of these challenges with some form of a checklist and we're like, oh, we're gonna, if we do A, B, or C, the result will be, and we still keep that focus or that emphasis on that end result. But ultimately, empathy is really, to me, like it's an offering with absolutely no confirmation that it was received. And it's also a felt process. It isn't necessarily in the words that we're saying, right? If you can say the words and there isn't a lot of heart behind it, I think kids more than anybody, because I always say kids sense and feel more than they see and hear, they will immediately know, like, oh, that felt very rehearsed. Somebody told you to say that to me. I don't know why you're talking like weirdo. Like they are the
Yes.
first ones to kind of call us out on that kind of stuff. But if
Yes.
it becomes the norm, right? If it becomes the situation where every time they have a moment, even if you don't agree, that you can express empathy. And I always have parents challenge this and say, well, that leans right into sort of permissive parenting. And I'm not a believer of being passive or permissive. And I think when people say that to me, I said, well, I'll come back and challenge that and say, where did you learn that softness, empathy, and love coupled with firm, clear boundaries can't coexist? That those two things can't be happening at the same time, meaning I can
Yeah.
set a boundary with love. I don't have to over explain the boundary. I don't have to be right in the eyes of my child. I know what's best for them when they're younger, but I can still show empathy because I understand they're not getting the outcome they want. And I know the frustration that comes with that,
Yeah.
right? So why
And,
can't that just be all together instead of being like, if I'm empathetic, I'm giving permissive parenting a pass.
and you'll see this with kids at any elementary school. You drive past an elementary school and kids are out at recess. Sure, there's kids on the playground, but you'll see kids right up against the fence. Kids love boundaries. That's where action is. Being at the edge of something is where the fun is,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no toys at the fence near the busy road, but they need to be there because
Yeah,
that's where the action is. So
right.
a lot of people, we like knowing how close to this edge can I get? And then you
Mm-hmm.
wait for them to be a teenager and they go, what's it like crossing this fence? And then
Mm-hmm.
I need to come back. So having firm boundaries actually gives children the place to play. It's where I joked about earlier, come home when the streetlights
Yeah.
come on. What that really indicates is I don't care what you do as long as
Mm-hmm.
you're home at this time.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
the boundary actually gives freedom. And this is something we talked about in the book. And I think this is a central theme of the book. And this is the sort of political nature of the book as well. Not that we're taking a political stance on anything, but
Mm-hmm.
the big picture kind of macroscopic view of kids these days is that as human beings, we love freedom. And we love being able to do whatever we want, whenever we want. At the same time, we love safety. And those two things are not always compatible.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the hard parts with kids is freedom is the first thing to go in the name of safety. So we say, you can't do that. You can't make that decision. That's too free. Freedom inspires risk. Risk means benefit or
Mm-hmm.
no benefit. But we can probably, if we really thought about it, find a way to balance out how can we give kids freedom and safety. And safety does mean boundaries and the freedom to roam in those boundaries.
Yeah.
So it actually inspires predictability. All the trauma informed soup du jour of the last 20 years is people need predictability, but they need that predictability to be a grounding place for them to launch into something else, to go take a risk, to know if I really mess this up, I know I'm not a loser. I got a place to
Mm-hmm.
hang out at home. And so I think that part of it, we haven't remembered that lesson of like really core democracy of freedom and safety. We need safety.
Yeah.
Everybody likes it, but safety is the place that you take a risk from. And that's the freedom of taking a risk.
Yeah. I love that so much. It's like, it reminds me of this. I kind of will tell when we do group things, I'll say to parents, think of your role more as like creating an environment that's conducive for connection. It's
Mm-hmm.
not always about, consequences and punishments and all these things. It's like, I understand, there's the nitty gritty of parenting and trying to understand how to respond to certain things, but boundaries, consistent, predictable boundaries are what create a sense of safety. When kids feel safe, that's when they learn how to regulate their emotions, how to express their emotions, how to push up against a boundary in a healthy way and understand where that boundary exists and lives. And like you say, how to roam sort of within that space. And they need to know that from our parents. And the more, and this will go to that pain question, for a lot of parents, it's really hard. I describe 4 really specific reaction types when I see a lot of parents that I work with, and I'll tell them to you, but I'd be curious to know sort of your thoughts on it. So, one is a parent will be the punisher, I say. This is the parent who goes from 0 to 100, very hyper, quick reactions, snappy, yelling. Uh, my parents did it to me and I'm fine, you'll be fine, right? That kind of a mentality, but a lot of control, right? At the core of that. Then I have what I call the panicked parent. And this is the parent that the minute their child is exhibiting or sensing discomfort, struggle, pain, whatever it might be, they become so quickly panicked that there is an immediate need to stop it, to fix it, to solve it, to get out of the discomfort. Then we have the adjuster. This is the parent who almost questions the boundary they've set based on the way their child pushes back. So then they go into, okay, well then fine, 2 more minutes, but just this time. And next time don't ask for 2 more minutes, but this time I'll
Yeah.
let you do 2 more minutes, right? So there is still this uneasiness around sitting in the discomfort that comes when we have to set a boundary. And then the last one is I find avoidance, like the avoidant response, which is just, I don't really know what to do, so I'm just not going to do anything. I know I don't like what you're doing, but I have no idea anymore what to say or do, so I'm just going to check out. And so, not that any of these are like I always tell parents, don't look at it as like right or wrong. Because I had one dad say to me, "Can you be all of them?" I think I'm all of them. I said,
We've
sometimes,
all been
yeah,
there. Yeah.
for sure. Like we can, depending on the circumstance. And it's not meant to make you feel bad. It's meant to say, let's explore this and then let's unpack why this is happening so that you can go back to that idea of what does my child actually need and what are they communicating through their behavior. Joe Newman will say a child uses behavior to get an answer to a question. So if we know that, we can look at it that way. We don't personalize everything either, and we can understand sort of our role and how do we answer or resolve this for them or whatever that question might be. So with that, what I find is there is a reluctance to any kind of pain. Pain is bad, right? And it is. But how do we help parents maybe embrace the idea that you just can't get through life without you need suffering and joy, and the two complement each other really, because without one you can't experience the full expansiveness of the other, right? If I never suffered in my life, those moments of joy wouldn't feel quite so wonderful. And so what would you guide a parent through if they're any one of those reaction types really at its core are parents who are so unsure of what to do with pain?
I think as my kids grew up and as young adults on their own, still seeing them in pain, experiencing any pain, a breakup, a bad exam at university, it's heartbreaking. Like it's terrible. And
It
as
is.
someone who's never owned a dog before, never grew up with a dog, we bought a bulldog 8 years ago. That was the worst decision of my life. I go, I can't deal with this thing, and it's allergic to the world. Like it's got allergies. It snores too much. It's the most expensive thing I've ever owned in my life. Besides kids, and I don't own
Yeah.
them, obviously. But seeing them suffer is awful because we would never want them to. But I 100% agree with you that being able to sit with them through that and go, I'm thinking of an experience with one of our kids, their recent breakup. And I just thought, I'm so happy you get to fall in love again.
I love that.
So I just think, you know, this is gonna suck right now, and it's gonna be brutal. But you know what? Then you get all the new. You get all the new, the fun, the excitement, the rush, the amazingness. So sometimes, just like falling off a surfboard, it's going to stink, but you have to keep going because you get that 1 second of standing up again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that sometimes we need to be there, not trying to fix things. We don't need to kick the door down like the fire department and spray everybody with water. Just go, I'm I'm here when you need me. And then we also don't, as parents, don't want to react more emotionally than how they're reacting.
Mm-hmm.
So think of us as, how would I react if I was 10% less than them? I'm sad for them, but it's also it's not my pain. So how can I give them a grounding place to come back to, to be with me? And so I think those sort of things are, this is a great list, like Punisher, Panicked, Adjuster, Avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great 4 categories that we all fit into, some, all, and or
Mm-hmm.
many others, any of those things. And when I think about it, I often think we have to be willing to sit with some uncomfortable ideas. And our kids feeling upset, and I listened to one of your recent podcasts about kids being uncomfortable with losing things,
Mm-hmm.
right? At the end of the day, losing means you got something you got to get better at.
Yep.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think as like a musician, as a teenage skateboarder, if you don't land a trick, you don't quit. You go, I better figure this out until I get it.
Yeah.
So so I think being there, not pushing them too fast in the sense of saying, well, you have to do this better next time. But really being there and embracing curiosity. And when kids have this, we see this happening on social media these days, especially on TikTok, where you hear someone talking and there's a video underneath of something totally irrelevant, some video
Mm-hmm.
game or something. One of the things is if you want to have an emotionally charged conversation with your teenager, go for a walk, kick a ball, cook dinner
Mhm.
together, go for a drive, do something,
Yeah.
you know? Do something to kind of divide the attention. You will go deeper with that child instead of just sitting face to face and going, you'll feel better one day. It's
Yeah.
not going to work. And so do something together and be together, be in proximity of each other, but don't make it only about solving a problem. So a great thing is chopping onions. Hey, can you help me move this box? And then have the conversation so that you're both focused on two things at once at the same
Yeah.
time. It's not only the emotions, because being a teenager, going through adolescence, the emotions are so charged and so in your face that you want to minimize them while not negating them, but you can minimize them by doing things together.
Yeah, I love that. And that's actually really great advice for younger children too. I've had parents
Yeah.
say to me, they're maybe going through a divorce or something's happening and they're like, they're just not saying much. And I said, well, one, they might not need to right now, right? They're kind of making sense of it in their own way. Two is how are we approaching it? And if it's really direct questions like this face to face, kids are so smart. I mean, I have always said the most ineffective strategies in parenting are long winded explanations and lectures. And so, if
Oh,
those are
yeah.
your go tos, they know it and they're like immediately going to start tuning you out. And so, I said, why do something where they are doing, even with their hands, like even if it's Play Doh, even if it's coloring or art or something, and just maybe comment. Don't even come in with a question. And you will see how quickly those floodgates open because there is just this different context now of how and where they can share where it doesn't feel like that spotlight is on them.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
love that.
I mean, when we talk about outdoor therapy, for example, which is, just my niche. It's not that interesting. It's very fun, but
It is so
um,
interesting. I really
yeah,
love the idea of bringing nature back to this.
yeah. And so one of the most interesting things is when you ask people, especially college students studying psychology, social work, counseling, you ask them who's the best portrayal of a therapist you've ever seen in a movie. Most people say Robin Williams' Good Will Hunting. And you
Mm,
go, I know, because the cover of the
yes.
movie is two people sitting on a park bench.
Yeah. Oh,
It
I
doesn't look
love
like
that.
therapy. Or you could say, and Robin Williams strangles Matt Damon in the movie. And you go, why do you think that's a good therapist? But it's because it's real.
Hmm.
It's not fabricated, it's not fake, it's two people talking on a park bench. And so, quite often, we get caught up in what's the script I have to follow. And the unfortunate thing, but also the best thing about teenagers, is they will never fall for that.
Yeah.
They read bullshit faster than anybody in the world. And so the greatest part is teenagers, the kids these days, are a test for us to be realer and be more authentic in who we are when we show up with them. And so I think, I've spent my adult life uh, providing therapy to teenagers, and I think what an honor to have been around these kids who can call me out faster than I could call them out. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. So who
Mm.
we are when we walk in the room is really important.
That's so beautiful. I love it. It makes me think of I've worked with kids for 23 years. I just recently switched over and work solely with parents, but I've said this and I will say it till my last breath, but kids have always been my greatest teacher. And it's always the kids
Mm.
who made you take everything you learned in graduate school and before and every
Yeah.
textbook that you ever thought was helpful and just that's right, throw that out
Yeah.
the window because this kid has a whole other agenda and it's your job to figure out how to show up, how to connect, how to make them feel safe, and how to get the best out of them. And it is always, always doable. So,
Mm.
thank you so much for your work. Thank you for your book. I would love to even invite you to come back on to just to talk about. We could do a
Anytime.
whole episode on just the nature aspect and the
Yeah,
fact of like your
love to.
outdoor therapy and all the benefits of that. But thank you so much for everything. Where can people find the book, find your work? I want to make sure and we will have all of this linked in the show notes too.
Yeah. So I'm available on all the social media platforms. You can just search my name, Will Dobud. Um, And I'm a pretty open book. I'm very accessible. I'm not hidden behind people. I love connecting with people. I love talking with people. One of my mentors said, "Will, your motto should be like Google, share everything." And so I have nothing that I think is off limits. Um, and as I say, my friends are not my business. So I'm excited just to talk with people all the time that are passionate about this stuff or have curious questions. The book is available on Amazon for pre-order, and we have a website, kidsthesedaysbook.com. If you do pre-order the book, flick me an email. You can find my email anywhere, willdobud.com. You just Google it, you'll find it anywhere. Send me the receipt that you've ordered it. I can send you some early access to the book. And we have webinars, parenting resources, things that Nevin and I have collated from our career in a password protected area. And then on September 30th, what we'll do is we will have a launch party for the book and hopefully have experts. You are totally invited if you'd love to
Oh,
come.
thank you. I would
I'll
love
send you
to.
an invite. And we'll have the experts that we interviewed in the book. Hopefully, some of them will be there. But we'll just raise a glass and have a toast for this project that we really love doing over the past few years. So, tons of ways to connect, to stay connected. If you're interested in outdoor therapy stuff, outdoortherapycenter.com. Because I have to live half my life in the Australian context, that is Center the British way, CENTRE.
Got it.
But there's about 40 hours of free webinars, presentations from outdoor people, teaching things. Everything's free on that website if you're interested. But other than that, no, I love staying in touch with people and love conversations like these. And so I just really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about our book from a totally different angle, from the parenting angle. And that, I think, is the perfect name of this podcast. That's a total reframe of what Nev and I did. And so that was just such a treat. And how fun was that?
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much. Congratulations again. I know
Thank you.
people will find this book and love it just as much as I did. And please come back.
I would love to.